The crystalline throne room of the Galactic Empire stretched for nearly a kilometer, its walls pulsing with the bioluminescent veins that marked Zephyrian architecture. Emperor Kethvar sat motionless on his obsidian seat, 6 arms folded across his chitinous chest as he reviewed the latest reports from the Outer Rim territories. His compound eyes, each the size of a human head, reflected the holographic displays floating before him like jeweled mirrors catching starlight. The conquest of the Sol system had been laughably simple. Humans, with their primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons, had posed no real threat to the Empire's gravitational pulse cannons and quantum shields. Their homeworld, Earth, had fallen in less than 72 standard hours. The resistance had been spirited, Kethvar acknowledged, but ultimately futile. What troubled him now, 3 cycles later, was not the victory itself, but the aftermath. The humans had proven remarkably difficult to integrate into the Empire's vast machine of conquest and resource extraction. Unlike the Vorthak, who had immediately surrendered their mining rights, or the Jelani, who had eagerly offered their biotechnology in exchange for protection, humans continued to resist. They sabotaged equipment, refused work assignments, and worst of all, they kept reproducing their rebellious nature in their offspring. The solution had been clinical, necessary, and mathematically sound. Eliminate the next generation before they could become a problem. The Imperial Bioweapon Division had developed a targeted pathogen that would affect only human children under the age of 16. Quick, painless, and efficient. The reports had been filed, the numbers recorded. 5,731 human children eliminated across 17 colonial worlds. General Thexmore, his chief military advisor, approached the throne with the measured gait of a career soldier. His 4 legs moved in perfect synchronization, his scaled hide bearing the scars of a dozen campaigns. "My Emperor, the human delegation has arrived." Kethvar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his species. "Ah, yes, the surrender ceremony. How delightfully predictable. Send them in." The massive doors, each carved from a single piece of neutronium-enhanced crystal, began to part with a sound like distant thunder. Kethvar expected to see a procession of broken humans, perhaps their remaining leaders come to beg for the lives of their people. What entered instead was a single figure, a human female, her dark skin unmarked by the usual signs of malnutrition that plagued the conquered worlds. She wore simple clothing, brown pants, and a white shirt, both somehow immaculately clean despite the long journey to the imperial capital. Her hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes held something that made Kethvar's secondary stomachs twist with an unfamiliar sensation. She was not afraid. More disturbing still, she carried no weapons, no recording devices, no signs of the desperate bargaining materials that conquered species typically brought to these meetings. She simply walked across the vast expanse of the throne room, her footsteps echoing in the silence, until she stood before the dais where Kethvar's throne loomed 30 feet above the floor. "I am Emperor Kethvar, sovereign of 17,000 worlds, commander of the infinite fleet, bringer of order to the chaos of lesser species." His voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic amplifiers, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. "You stand before the architect of your species' fate. Speak your surrender, human, and perhaps some of your kind will be permitted to serve the Empire." The woman looked up at him with those disturbingly calm eyes. Around them, the court held its collective breath. Advisors, generals, and nobles from a dozen species waited to witness this moment of final capitulation, the last act in humanity's brief and insignificant story. When she spoke, her voice was neither loud nor soft, neither angry nor pleading. It carried perfectly through the chamber's engineered acoustics, reaching every ear, every auditory sensor, every consciousness present. "No. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Not, "We surrender," but "ask for mercy." Not, "Please spare our children." Not, "We offer these terms." Simply, absolutely, utterly, no. Kethvar felt his primary heart skip a beat. In 700 years of conquest, through the subjugation of species ranging from the crystalline HFY to the energy beings of the Vortex Nebula, no one had ever simply said no to him. There had been negotiations, pleadings, desperate offers, and elaborate surrender ceremonies. There had been defiant speeches and last stands and dramatic gestures. But no one had ever looked at the absolute power of the Galactic Empire and simply refused it. "I do not think you understand your position, human." His voice carried a dangerous edge now. The harmonics shifted to frequencies that had been known to drive lesser species mad with terror. "Your military has been destroyed. Your worlds are occupied. Your children are dead. You have nothing left with which to bargain." The woman's expression didn't change. If anything, her eyes seemed to grow calmer, as if his words had somehow brought her peace rather than the intended despair. "We know about the children," she said simply. "All 5,731 of them. We know their names. We remember their faces. We've built monuments to their memory on every world where they lived." Kethvar's compound eyes focused on her with predatory intensity. "Then you understand that resistance is futile. We can and will eliminate every human in the galaxy if necessary." "You can try," she replied, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You should know, though, that those children you killed weren't random casualties of war. They weren't even the weakest members of our species." She paused, her eyes never leaving his massive form. "They were the gentlest, the most peaceful, the ones who might have grown up to forgive you." Something cold began to form in Kethvar's primary nervous cluster, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his larval stage when predators had stalked the spawning pools of his homeworld. "What are you saying?" The human's smile widened slightly, and Kethvar suddenly realized that what he had mistaken for calm in her eyes was actually something far more dangerous. It was patience. The patience of a predator that has cornered its prey and is simply waiting for the right moment to strike. "I'm saying you've made a mistake, Emperor. You thought you were removing a threat by killing our children, but what you actually did was remove our mercy." She took a single step closer to the dais, and somehow that small movement felt like the falling of an executioner's blade. Those children were our future diplomats, our peacemakers, our healers. They were the voices that would have argued for forgiveness, for coexistence, for finding a way forward that didn't involve the complete destruction of your empire. The throne room had fallen so silent that the only sound was the Emperor's own breathing, suddenly labored despite his species' efficient respiratory system. "Now," the human continued, her voice still perfectly level, perfectly calm, "the only humans left are the ones like me. The ones who don't believe in forgiveness. The ones who understand that some actions require consequences. The ones who have spent their entire lives studying warfare, strategy, and the most efficient methods of killing." She reached into her pocket, and every weapon in the room instantly trained on her. But what she pulled out wasn't a gun or a knife or some exotic human technology. It was a small piece of paper, folded carefully and worn from handling. "This is a list," she said, holding it up. "The names and locations of every Imperial official involved in the decision to murder our children. Every scientist who designed the bioweapon. Every general who deployed it. Every administrator who filed the paperwork. Every politician who voted for it." She looked directly at Kethvar. "Your name is at the top." The Emperor's 6 arms moved of their own accord, reaching for weapons, for communication devices, for anything that might restore his sense of control. But he found himself frozen, caught in the gaze of this small, unarmed human who somehow radiated more menace than an entire battle fleet. "You're threatening the Emperor of the Galaxy," General Thexmore snarled, his own weapons systems charging with audible whines. The woman didn't even glance at him. "No," she said simply. "I'm making a promise." She folded the paper carefully and put it back in her pocket. Then she turned and began walking toward the massive doors, her footsteps echoing through the chamber like a countdown. "Wait," Kethvar found himself calling, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. "What do you want? What are your terms?" The human stopped, but didn't turn around. "Terms?" She spoke the word as if it were a foreign concept. "Emperor, you don't seem to understand. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a surrender. This isn't even a declaration of war." Finally, she turned back to look at him one last time. "This is a notification. We wanted you to know that we're coming. All of us. And we wanted you to know why." She resumed walking toward the exit, and Kethvar realized with growing horror that he was going to let her leave. That every instinct screaming at him to destroy this threat, to end this human before she could act on her promises, was being overridden by a more primitive fear. The kind of fear that had kept his ancestors alive in the spawning pools. The fear of something that wasn't just dangerous but utterly, implacably hostile. As the great doors began to open, the woman spoke one last time without turning around. Her words carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics, reaching every ear, settling into every mind like a seed of inevitable doom. "You should have killed all of us when you had the chance." The doors closed behind her with finality, leaving the throne room in Ab. The emergency session of the Imperial War Council convened 6 hours after the human delegation's departure. The vast circular chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species took their positions around the holographic display table. The air recycling systems worked overtime to accommodate the various atmospheric requirements, creating swirling currents that carried the sense of fear and uncertainty. Emperor Kethvar entered through his private portal, moving with less than his usual commanding presence. The events in the throne room had shaken him in ways he didn't fully understand, and the feeling hadn't subsided with time. If anything, the human's words had grown more ominous in retrospect, like the echo of thunder that promises a coming storm. "Report," he commanded as he took his position at the head of the table. Admiral Vretok, the Empire's chief naval strategist, activated the holographic displays with a gesture of her crystalline appendage. Star charts materialized in the air, showing the current positions of Imperial fleets across 17,000 worlds. Red warning indicators pulsed ominously around the Sol system and its surrounding sectors. "My Emperor, our monitoring stations have detected unusual activity throughout human space. Mass communications between their scattered populations, industrial facilities operating at unprecedented capacity, and most concerning of all, complete radio silence from their primary research installations." General Thexmore, still rattled from witnessing the throne room encounter, stepped forward. "With respect, my Emperor, perhaps we're overreacting to the words of one unarmed human. Their entire species numbers less than 30 billion across all their colonies. Our smallest battle group could sterilize every human world in a matter of days." "Could we?" The question came from scientific advisor Yelndar, whose massive brain case pulsed with bioluminescent thought patterns. "I've been reviewing our intelligence files on human behavior patterns. This species has some unique characteristics." The Emperor's mandibles clicked impatiently. "Explain." Yelndar gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show historical data about Earth and human civilization. "Most species we encounter develop along predictable evolutionary paths. Prey species become docile and cooperative. Predator species become aggressive but territorial. Humans appear to be both simultaneously, which creates some interesting psychological dynamics. "Get to the point," Kethvar demanded. "They're persistence hunters, my emperor. On their homeworld, humans were not the strongest, fastest, or most well-armed predators. Instead, they evolved to simply outlast their prey. They would track wounded animals for days, weeks even, following them at a steady pace until the prey collapsed from exhaustion." The advisor's brain case flashed with rapid calculations. They apply this same mentality to warfare, politics, and apparently, revenge. Admiral Vraytok's crystalline form chimed with harmonic frequencies that indicated deep concern. "Our psychological profiles suggested that eliminating their young would break their will to resist. For most species, losing their offspring triggers a protective hibernation response, causing adults to focus on survival rather than aggression. But not humans," Yelndar continued. "Preliminary analysis suggests that harming human young triggers something they call berserker rage, but it's more sophisticated than simple anger. They become methodical, patient, and absolutely implacable in their pursuit of vengeance." The Emperor's secondary heart began beating faster. "You're telling me that by killing their children, we may have made them more dangerous, not less?" "Potentially, yes. But there's more." The scientific advisor's patterns shifted to deep purple, indicating maximum concern. "I've been analyzing the bioweapon deployment records. The pathogen was designed to target human juveniles based on their unique genetic markers. However, the targeting parameters were oddly specific." General Thexmore leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The bioweapon didn't just kill random human children. It specifically targeted those with genes associated with empathy, cooperation, and peaceful problem-solving. In essence, we accidentally created a massive selective pressure that removed the most pacifistic elements of their population." The throne room fell silent as the implications sank in. Emperor Kethvar felt his primary nervous cluster contract with something approaching panic. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that we didn't just murder their children? We performed an unintentional genetic purge that removed their capacity for mercy?" "That appears to be the case, my emperor. The surviving humans would be disproportionately represented by individuals with genes for aggression, strategic thinking, and long-term planning. Essentially, we've created a population of natural-born warriors and tacticians." Admiral Vraytok's harmonic frequency shifted to emergency tones. "My emperor, I'm receiving reports from our outer perimeter stations. We're detecting massive energy signatures moving through the void between star systems. Whatever the humans are doing, it requires enormous amounts of power." The holographic display updated to show sensor readings from the edge of human space. Strange gravitational anomalies were appearing throughout the region, suggesting the movement of objects with tremendous mass. But the signatures didn't match any known human technology. "Could they have developed new weapons?" Thexmore asked. "Unlikely," Yelndar responded. "Their technological base was centuries behind ours when we conquered them. Even with rapid development, they couldn't have advanced far enough to pose a serious threat to our fleets." Emperor Kethvar stared at the anomalous readings, remembering the human woman's words. The calm certainty in her voice when she had delivered her promise of retribution. Something was happening. Something his advisors couldn't explain with their conventional understanding of warfare and technology. "Show me the detailed sensor logs," he commanded. The display zoomed in on specific readings from the past 6 hours. The gravitational signatures were indeed massive, but their composition was puzzling. Instead of the concentrated mass of ships or weapons, the readings suggested something distributed, like a cloud of smaller objects moving in perfect coordination. "Wait." Admiral Vraytok's harmonic frequency shifted to confusion. "These mass readings, they're not technological signatures. They're biological." "Biological?" The Emperor's compound eyes focused with predatory intensity. Explain. The gravitational signatures match the mass distribution of living organisms, thousands of them all moving through space in formation. The Admiral's crystalline form darkened. My Emperor, I believe the humans are not bringing weapons to fight us. They're bringing themselves. The implications hit the War Council like a physical blow. Humans traveling through the vacuum of space without ships, without life support, without any of the technological infrastructure that made interstellar travel possible for every other known species. It was impossible, insane, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. How? General Thexmore's voice cracked with disbelief. Scientific advisor Yelndar's brain case was now pulsing so rapidly it appeared almost solid in its luminescence. I'm correlating these readings with historical data about human physiology. During our conquest, we noted some unusual adaptations. Their cardiovascular system is remarkably robust. Their skeletal structure is dense enough to withstand high gravitational forces, and their nervous system shows unusual redundancy patterns. You think they've modified themselves somehow? More than that, I think they've been preparing for this scenario for longer than we realized. The readings suggest they've found a way to survive in hard vacuum for extended periods. But that's not the most disturbing part. The Emperor leaned forward despite himself. What is? The formation patterns they're traveling in. They're not random. They're tactical. Each group corresponds to a different target within our empire's infrastructure. Military installations, shipyards, administrative centers. The advisor's patterns shifted to deep red. They're not coming to negotiate or to fight a conventional war. They're coming to systematically dismantle our entire civilization. The War Council chamber erupted in panicked discussion as representatives from various species began calculating the defense requirements for their homeworlds. But Emperor Kethvar remained focused on the sensor readings, trying to understand how an apparently primitive species could have developed capabilities that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Then Admiral Vraytok's harmonic frequency shifted to pure terror, a sound that made every being in the chamber fall silent. "My Emperor," she whispered, "we're receiving a transmission from the outer perimeter. Audio only." "Put it through." The chamber's communication systems activated, filling the space with the sound of human voices. Not one voice, but thousands. All speaking in perfect unison across the vast emptiness of space. The words were in the human language called English, but the translation systems quickly provided meaning. "We remember Sarah Chen, age 7, who loved butterflies and wanted to be a scientist. We remember Marcus Rodriguez, age 12, who built robots from spare parts and dreamed of exploring the stars. We remember Fatima Al-Zahra, age 14, who wrote poetry about peace between worlds. We remember each name, each face, each dream that you stole from the universe." The litany continued, listing name after name, life after life, each human child whose existence had been snuffed out by the Imperial bioweapon. But it wasn't just a memorial. With each name, the voices provided detailed information about the Imperial personnel responsible for that specific death. Locations, routines, personal details that should have been classified beyond any possible human access. We remember David Park, age 9, killed by bioweapon batch designation Alpha 7, manufactured at Imperial Facility 445B under the supervision of Science Director Gelmoth, who lives at Residential Complex Zeta Prime, Level 847, Apartment 23A, and who has a daughter named Veltha, attending the Academy of Advanced Sciences. Emperor Kethvar's blood turned to ice as he realized what he was hearing. The humans weren't just listing their dead children. They were listing their targets, complete with the personal information needed to find and eliminate every single being who had played a role in the massacre. We remember Emma Thompson, age 13, who wanted to become a teacher. Killed by bioweapon deployment authorized by General Krixval, currently stationed at Command Base Omega-7, who enjoys recreational swimming in the thermal pools of Deck 15 every morning at 600 hours. The voices continued their recitation, each entry more detailed than the last, revealing intelligence capabilities that seemed impossible for a conquered species. Somehow, in the 3 cycles since their defeat, the humans had infiltrated the Empire's most secure systems and compiled a comprehensive database of everyone involved in their children's deaths. "My Emperor," Admiral Vretok's harmonic frequency was barely audible. "How could they possibly have obtained this information?" "Our security protocols should have prevented any external access to personnel records." Scientific advisor Yelndar's brain case was now strobing with rapid calculations. Unless they didn't obtain the information externally. "My Emperor, what if the humans didn't just develop the ability to travel through space? What if they developed the ability to infiltrate our biological systems?" The Emperor felt his primary heart stop completely for several seconds before restarting with irregular rhythms. "You mean parasites?" "Not parasites, symbiotes, microscopic organisms that could survive in multiple environments, gather information, and transmit it back to human controllers. We know they have sophisticated biotechnology. What the first reports began arriving 18 hours later. Emperor Kethvar hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't moved from the War Council chamber as his vast empire began reporting incidents that defied all logic and understanding. The holographic displays now showed a galaxy-wide map dotted with red emergency indicators, each one representing another impossible human attack. "Imperial Research Station Theta 9 has gone silent," reported Admiral Vretok, her crystalline form dim with exhaustion. "Last transmission indicated that Dr. Meltar, the lead bioweapon designer, was found in his laboratory with his nervous system somehow rewired to spell out the name Jenny Morrison, age 8, in neural pathways." General Thexmore's scales had lost their usual lustrous sheen. Command Base Sigma-12 reports that General Vorthak was discovered in his private quarters, alive but changed. His memories have been selectively edited. He can remember everything about his military career except for any involvement in the human genocide. When shown documentation of his authorization codes on the bioweapon deployment orders, he breaks down crying and keeps repeating, "I would never hurt children." The reports continued, each more disturbing than the last. Across 17,000 worlds, every individual who had participated in the systematic murder of human children was being systematically hunted down by beings that seemed to materialize from empty space, strike with surgical precision, and vanish without trace. But the humans weren't simply killing their targets. That would have been comprehensible, even expected. Instead, they were doing something far more sophisticated and terrifying. Each attack was precisely calibrated to the psychological profile of the victim and the specific nature of their crime. Scientific advisor Yelndar's brain case was strobing with analysis patterns. "My Emperor, I've been correlating the attack patterns with our psychological profiles of the victims. The humans appear to understand our neural structures better than we do ourselves. They're not just seeking revenge, they're delivering poetic justice." "Explain," Kethvar demanded, though part of him dreaded the answer. "Dr. Gelmoth, who designed the targeting parameters for the bioweapon, has been modified so that he experiences the emotions and memories of every human child his weapon killed. He's currently in medical containment, experiencing the terror and confusion of 847 dying children simultaneously. Administrator Velthar, who processed the deployment authorizations, has had his memory centers altered so that he remembers having 5,731 children of his own, all of whom he believes were murdered by an unknown alien species." Emperor Kethvar felt his secondary stomachs rebel against their contents. "They're torturing them." "More than that," Yelndar continued. "They're educating them, Each victim is being forced to understand, on a visceral level, exactly what they did and what it felt like for their victims. It's the most sophisticated psychological warfare I've ever encountered. The holographic display updated with new reports. Shipyards throughout the empire were reporting equipment failures as their manufacturing systems began producing children's toys instead of weapons. Transportation networks were being subtly sabotaged to display images of human children in their advertising systems. Even the Imperial Food Distribution Network had been compromised, with nutrient dispensers across thousands of worlds now delivering meals that tasted exactly like birthday cake. "How are they doing this?" General Thexmore's voice carried a note of desperation. "We've tripled security protocols, initiated complete communication blackouts, and deployed our most advanced detection systems. Our sensors show no ships, no weapons, no technology of any kind. It's as if the humans have become ghosts." Admiral Vratov's harmonic frequency shifted to a pattern that indicated deep analysis. "My Emperor, I've been reviewing the initial contact reports from our conquest of Earth. There were some anomalies in human behavior that we dismissed as irrelevant at the time." "What kind of anomalies?" "They demonstrated an unusual ability to adapt to hostile environments. Our occupation forces reported that humans could survive in conditions that should have been lethal, and they showed remarkable resistance to our standard pacification technologies. We assumed it was simple biological diversity, but what if it was something more?" Scientific advisor Yelndar's patterns shifted to deep purple. "I've been analyzing the gravitational signatures from their space-borne approach patterns. The mass distributions aren't consistent with any known biology. It's as if they've somehow altered their fundamental physical properties." The Emperor's compound eyes focused with predatory intensity. "Are you suggesting they've transcended their original biology?" "Possibly. The energy readings from their attacks suggest they're manipulating matter at the molecular level. Not with technology, but with some kind of biological process we don't understand. They may have turned themselves into something that exists partially outside normal space-time." A new alert chimed through the chamber's communication systems. The display showed incoming transmission from the Imperial Palace's own security division. Emperor Kethvar felt his primary heart skip several beats as he realized that the humans had somehow breached the most secure location in the galaxy. "Report," he commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "My Emperor!" The security chief's voice was tight with barely controlled terror. "We found something in your private quarters. You need to see this immediately." The transmission cut to a visual feed from the Emperor's personal chambers. The room appeared normal at first glance, but as the camera panned across the familiar space, details became apparent that made Kethvar's blood freeze in his circulatory system. Every surface in the room had been covered with photographs, not holographic displays, but actual printed images on some kind of organic material. Thousands upon thousands of pictures showing human children engaged in normal activities. Playing, learning, laughing, creating art, exploring their worlds with the boundless curiosity of youth. But these weren't just random images. As the camera focused on individual photographs, it became clear that each picture showed one of the 5,731 children who had been killed by the Imperial bioweapon. Each image was labeled with a name, an age, and a brief description of what that child had hoped to become. In the center of the room, arranged on the Emperor's own sleeping platform, were toys. Simple, handmade objects crafted from materials found on the occupied human worlds. Dolls, model spaceships, stuffed animals, building blocks, all created with the kind of loving care that parents put into gifts for their children. "My Emperor," the security chief's voice continued, "there's no indication of how these items arrived here. No breaches in our security perimeter, no trace of unauthorized access. It's as if they simply materialized from empty space." Emperor Kethvar stared at the images. recognizing the psychological warfare for what it was. The humans weren't just demonstrating their ability to reach him anywhere, they were forcing him to confront the individual reality of each life he had ordered destroyed. These weren't statistics or military casualties. They were children who had been loved, who had dreams and hopes and futures that he had personally decided to eliminate. "There's something else," the security chief added reluctantly. "We found a message." The camera focused on the Emperor's private desk, where someone had left a single sheet of the same organic material used for the photographs. Written on it, in precise script, using what appeared to be human blood, was a simple message. "We wanted you to know their names before we come for you." The transmission ended, leaving the War Council chamber in absolute silence. Emperor Kethvar felt something he hadn't experienced in 700 years of conquest, genuine, paralyzing fear, not just for his own safety, but for the survival of everything he had built. "My Emperor," Admiral Vritok's harmonic frequency was barely audible. "Our outer perimeter stations are reporting massive gravitational anomalies approaching the capital system. Whatever the humans have become, they're almost here." General Thexmore stepped forward, his usual military bearing replaced by something approaching panic. "My Emperor, I recommend immediate evacuation to the Emergency Command Facility. We can coordinate our defenses from there." "No." The word came out stronger than Kethvar had expected. "I will not run from a species I conquered with ease just 3 cycles ago." Scientific advisor Yelndar's brain case pulsed with urgent patterns. "My Emperor, with respect, the species you conquered no longer exists. Whatever the humans have become, they're not the same beings we defeated. They've evolved, adapted, transformed themselves into something that operates by rules we don't understand." "They're still biological entities," the Emperor insisted, though his own words sounded hollow even to himself. "They can be killed, contained, defeated." "Can they?" Yelndar's patterns shifted to deep red. "My Emperor, consider what we've observed. They survive in hard vacuum. They manipulate matter at the molecular level. They appear to exist partially outside normal space-time. They demonstrate intelligence-gathering capabilities that exceed our most advanced systems. And most importantly, they've shown a level of psychological sophistication that suggests they understand us better than we understand ourselves." The Admiral's crystalline form chimed with harmonics of terror. "My Emperor, the gravitational signatures are getting stronger. They'll be here within hours." Emperor Kethvar stared at the tactical displays, watching as the red indicators representing human forces closed in on his capital world. For 700 years, he had been the predator, the unstoppable force that brought order to chaotic, lesser species. Now, for the first time in his long life, he was prey. "What do they want?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Justice," Admiral Vritok replied simply. The Emperor's mandibles clicked together in nervous patterns. "And if we surrender? If we offer reparations, territorial concessions, anything they might accept?" Scientific advisor Yelndar's brain case had gone completely dark, a sign of absolute certainty. "My Emperor, I don't believe surrender is an option they're prepared to consider. They didn't come here to negotiate. They came here to balance the scales." The chamber's communication systems activated without being summoned, filled once again with the sound of thousands of human voices speaking in perfect unison across the void of space. But this time, they weren't reciting the names of the dead. They were speaking directly to him. "Emperor Kethvar, sovereign of 17,000 worlds, commander of the infinite fleet, bringer of order to the chaos of lesser species. You wanted us to know that you had killed our children. You wanted us to understand that resistance was futile. You wanted us to accept that your empire was too powerful to challenge." The voices paused, and in that silence, Kethvar could hear the sound of his own primary heart beating irregularly in his chest. We have a message for you now. We want you to know that we remember every child you murdered. We want you to understand that your empire's time is ending. And we want you to accept that what's coming next is justice, not war. The transmission continued, but the tone shifted to something that made every being in the chamber want to flee in terror. We are no longer the species you conquered. We are no longer bound by the limitations that made us weak. We have become something new, something that exists for one purpose: to ensure that what you did to our children never happens to anyone else's children anywhere in the galaxy ever again. Emperor Kethvar closed his compound eyes and tried to imagine a future where his empire might survive what was coming. He found that his imagination was not sufficient to the task. The humans were here. If they've been deploying it since the moment we conquered them. The transmission continued, each name accompanied by increasingly impossible intelligence about Imperial personnel across thousands of worlds. Personal habits, family information, classified project details, strategic vulnerabilities that even the Emperor himself wasn't aware of. And then the voices shifted, taking on a tone that made every being in the chamber want to flee. We have been patient. We have been thorough. We have been kind enough to give you warning. Now we are coming. The transmission cut off, leaving the War Council in absolute silence. Emperor Kethvar stared at the sensor readings showing thousands of humans traveling through the void, each one apparently capable of surviving conditions that would instantly kill any other known species, each one armed with detailed intelligence about their specific targets. For the first time in 700 years of conquest, the Emperor of the Galaxy realized that he might have made a mistake that would cost him everything. Absolute silence. Kethvar sat motionless on his obsidian throne, staring at the space where the human had stood, trying to process what had just occurred. Around him, his advisors and generals exchanged uncertain glances, waiting for orders that didn't come. For the first time in 700 years of conquest, the Emperor of the Galaxy had no idea what to do next. He only knew that something fundamental had changed in the balance of power, something that couldn't be undone with fleets or weapons or the usual tools of imperial might. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, humanity was preparing for war. And for the first time in his long life, Kethvar wondered if his empire was strong enough to survive what was coming.